Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Friday morning. At this time, it is Friday, February 15th, 9:15 a.m. Technically, we don't have a national emergency called yet. I feel like we're in a crisis. I can't believe it's waited this long. We've been in perpetual crisis now for 10 years? What's going on at the border? But the important thing is, Matt, I feel like the biggest news of the week, we know what it is. We're not going to get blindsided. We can just relax and have a nice week in review show and not worry about some shenanigans happening at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, making the whole show worthless before it's uploaded.
That would never happen. Besides, let's be honest, people don't tune in because this is topical. They tune in because of you and me. This rapport we have, and none of it matters. We could be talking about, I don't know, movies, and people would tune in.
A little foreshadowing, Matt Lewis. But sort of like the old Letterman show. It didn't matter who the guest was.
Yeah.
You were watching Letterman.
Yeah. I was just, and speaking of which, I was just listening, our friend Chris Novembrino, who is a fan of the show, and he just did the music for my new from Matt Lewis in the News, the new music for my podcast. He's got several podcasts, and he has one of them's devoted to wrestling, and they just did an episode on Andy Kaufman and remember when he was like wrestling in tennis in Memphis and stuff, and he went on David Letterman and had a fake fight.
Right.
With the wrestler. So they did a whole episode on that. It was so much fun. But it was great to hear the clips of, the young Letterman, sort of how he was handling it, and it was fun. Yeah.
Speaking of, Andy Kaufman sort of, what he loved doing is sort of playing on the coastal heartland cultural divide.
I'm from Hollywood.
Right.
Now, he actually did apparently a video or something where he taught the people of Memphis how to use a bar of soap.
So this is totally random, total non sequitur. Didn't talk to you about this before. I introduced my kids to "Free to Be You and Me," which the same record I had, the scratched up record that I had and I loved as a kid. And it just occurred to me, I bet Matt Lewis did not have the "Free to Be You and Me" record as a kid growing up. Is that a fair assumption?
What's "Free to Be You and Me"?
It's exactly what I was thinking about.
What are we talking about?
You have no idea what I'm talking about.
Do I go along and pretend that I know this? And oh yeah, I did my thesis on this. Or what's "Free to Be You and Me"? You and Me.
So "Free to Be You and Me" came out in the 70s. It was a Marlo Thomas production. It was star-studded. It had Mel Brooks. It had Alan Alda, and it was a feminist children's record.
Oh my God.
And so almost all the songs are about gender equality, and and girls can do anything, and boys can play with dolls, and it's. Even if you don't like the politics of it, it's a really good children's record. So even today, I can play it for my kids, and they're instantly, excited about it because it's just.
I was listening to Jerry Clower and Ray Stevens.
See, so when I was a kid, in fact, when I was a senior in high school, and a friend of mine, we decided to. We didn't get leads in the school musical, even though we were seniors, and we were sort of bummed about that. And so we said, let's put on our own senior musical and give all the seniors a chance to be in a show they haven't been in a show before. And we decided to do "Free to Be You and Me" as our show. And it was everyone knew what that was because we growing up in upper middle class suburban New York, all the kids had "Free to Be You and Me." And I'm listening to it today. I'm like, I bet Matt Lewis in rural Maryland had no idea what this record is.
No idea. People see, you mentioned the rural part's very important for people who don't know my background. I'm from a really redneck, I don't mean that pejoratively, but rural background. And so, this was way beyond my experience, anything to do with this. This not only did I not know it, nobody I knew had heard of this.
Well, I'll say this, Matt. You should get this for your kids.
Really?
I honestly, I really can't think of anything in it that would really bother you. You're not one to say that women should stay in the home and just raise the kids. Your relationship is certainly not like that. You're not preaching toxic masculinity to your children. If you hear a song about how boys should play with dolls, I don't think that's gonna rub you the wrong way. There's just good stuff on it. It's just a good kids record.
Well, I do have to say, obviously, we didn't have Free to Be You and Me, but we had MASH. So I am familiar with the workings of Alan Alda.
I think Alan Alda, he had this reputation of being a real feminist at the time. I mean, he is a very liberal, person politically, but Hawkeye is horrible. Hawkeye is the absolute worst.
Well, he's definitely was a womanizer, but with a heart of gold. Deep down.
Obviously that's part of the character, but can you think of someone more objectifying on TV than Hawkeye's character? I mean, truly, truly horrible.
Well, I think in hindsight, yes, but at the time, I don't even know if liberals would have found Hawkeye fierce.
I mean, I'm sure maybe there's some academic paper somewhere, but in general, he was the great anti-war liberal sticking it to the military establishment who thought war was horrible and there's no point of them even being there. And his womanizing was considered just, a fun sideline.
Yeah.
But today, if you watch it, you would be completely horrified of all the stuff that he does.
I think we should just do a whole show on that. But anyway, I will check that out. I will check it out. My kids are rapidly becoming too cool for me and like postmodern. There's this book, I forget what it's called. But there was this children's book that like a year ago I was reading them and it was pretty wholesome. And now my kids are into like Diary of a Wimpy Kid,
okay,
and Captain Underpants, and these are all. I mean, they're a little bit edgy. And
I'm hearing from my kid who's in fourth grade now that all the kids in her class play Fortnite, and my daughter is horrified by Fortnite. So if your kids are on Captain Underpants, you're not going that deep into the abyss.
Well, we're trying hard to keep them on the straight and narrow, but it's a full-time job.
Let's get back to business. So you were on CNN this week. You are not happy that Donald Trump is on the verge of calling for a national emergency. You think this is a violation of fundamental conservatism that's going to bite Republicans down the line?
Yeah, both. I think I hate it on the merits. And I hate it for the politics. So I think there's lots of reasons to hate it. But I'm not surprised at all. This is Donald Trump's out. It's his way of getting out of this conundrum of having been outmaneuvered and making a promise he couldn't deliver. I am disappointed in Mitch McConnell, who is supporting it. I mean, I'm not surprised by that.
Are you really surprised here?
I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. Like, I'm not surprised because I don't believe in politicians or trust politicians, even Cocaine Mitch. But I am disappointed because I think that you could make an argument that Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, although they're both wily political operators and partisans, are adults and veterans, and they have some belief in the institutions, and that they were serving to some degree as a form of guardrail against the worst impulses of their parties. I mean, I know people who are going to say Merrick Garland are going to laugh at me for saying this, but I think that you could have made an argument for that. But it's much harder to make that argument in light of McConnell's support of this emergency order.
Well, I mean, even Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland is not. Merrick Garland was I think, offensive politics. I thought it was horrible they did him as a person. I thought it was. I thought he was a good faith bipartisan pick that McConnell completely snubbed for out of a hunger for more ideological justice. But it was not extra constitutional they had the numbers to block it. There's nothing in the Constitution that says they have to do this. It was just not the norm. It was not tradition. And they had a convoluted argument to argue that it was tradition. That somehow you're not allowed to make picks in an election year, which is nonsense. But it was, if you got the numbers, you can do it. This is McConnell saying something that you got to know deep down. He knows it's unconstitutional.
Yeah. Well, and not only does he know that, he suggested as much like 2 weeks ago. He has been publicly saying, like, I hope he doesn't do this. Right. This is a bad idea. I would not. I don't have it in front of me, but he, of course, knows that this is wrong and problematic, and he's going along with it anyway.
I mean, McConnell's always been one to say, I'm not going to junk the filibuster today because I know it's going to come in handy later on. So he does have a long view, as soulless and dark his heart may be. He's usually not one just to be in the moment politically.
The Long Game is the name of his book. And I would mention that what is about to happen with this emergency order is much more dangerous in terms of precedent and in terms of its constitutionality than getting rid of the filibuster. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution that says you should need to have a filibuster. I mean, that's based on like Senate precedent and tradition, and it has changed over the years how many votes you need for cloture. This is a different animal here with this emergency order. Now, look, we have had many emergencies, but they've actually been emergencies. They haven't been done to cloak the ability of the executive to essentially act unilaterally. And that's what this really is in danger of doing.
Well, here's where I'm more sanguine about it than you are. I mean, I can't be 100% sanguine. I can't know exactly how this is going to play out. But you're hearing from folks like you. I saw Jonah Goldberg had a piece on this. And you see Democrats saying this as well. If Trump can do this on immigration, what's stopping Democrats from saying it's a national emergency on climate change? It's a national emergency on guns, where there's even more of an argument in both cases that there are actual emergencies. There is the chance of, widespread calamity with climate change. There's people dying all the time from gun violence. You could make more of an argument there. But I suspect that Trump is going to be blocked by the courts. And as Harry Truman was blocked by the courts when he declared national emergency for nationalizing the steel industry. And if he is blocked by the courts and that precedent is solidified, that you can't just call national emergencies for whatever when you're president, why would that be a benefit for Democrats down the line? That's going to make it harder for Democrats to pull the same trick. And I bet McConnell is thinking, like, I'm going to say this. I know it's bullshit, but I don't think he's going to get past the courts, and we're not going to pay the price for it down the line.
That's playing with fire. We've talked about this before. George W. Bush thought the court would strike down McCain-Feingold after he signed it.
They did.
But not for a while. And so my point here is that I think it's dangerous to do something under the assumption that there'll be a safety out there that will save the day for you. That may not happen. And look, there is a plausible argument for doing this. It's a stretch. I don't believe that this is an emergency. But I don't have them in front of me, but there are arguments that the military can be used to build fortifications. And, there are a couple of different pieces of law that could be construed. I would argue probably won't be, but could be construed to buttress this argument. This could happen. It's within the realm of possibility. And if it does, I just think if we're talking about expanding the Overton window and creating a permission structure, that if we're having a serious conversation about this, we're one step closer to it happening.
Let me take that moment to segue to talk about Green New Deal, because you mentioned Overton window. And there is an argument that, so as you well know, Senator Ed Markey, my senator, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came together to introduce a resolution So it's a non-binding resolution. It's not a law. It doesn't have a lot of details. As some have said, it's aspirational. But it would commit the Senate, to commit Congress to then draft legislation to the ends of the resolution. And even though it is extremely ambitious, 10-year mobilization, net zero carbon emissions, attached to a federal job guarantee, it doesn't literally say Medicare for all, it doesn't literally say universal basic income, it doesn't literally say affordable housing for all, but it indicates it's where it wants to go. Even talking retrofitting all buildings, so on and so forth. Some people say, even if this doesn't happen, we are expanding the Overton window. We're expanding the what's possible to talk about, and that's going to make other climate legislation be more possible in the future. And I think it is possible that is the net result of this, but I don't for a second believe that is what the sponsors of this legislation, maybe not Markey, but the Ocasio-Cortezes, the Justice Democrats of the world, I do not believe they're just playing Overton window here. I think there was an article in Bloomberg where some of those activists were suggesting that. But there's other things that they have said. Sean McElwee, if I'm pronouncing his last name right, who runs Data for Progress, he was one of the policy architects of Green New Deal. He talked to Vox, and he said, forgive me if I'm not quite exactly verbatim because it's not in front of me, this is the standard of what progressive is now. If you don't support Green New Deal, you are by definition not progressive. So the train is leaving the station, and I'm quoting him here. So choo-choo, motherfucker. Get on that train, or essentially we're going to say you're not a progressive. So I believe the driving impetus of this, from the activist left, the activist populist socialist left, is not primarily Overton window. They don't want a moderate climate bill. I mean, and I think we talked about this in the past show. I mean, we had a situation in Washington State where there was a ballot initiative for a revenue neutral carbon tax, which would have been considered a pretty left-wing position. And any sort of carbon tax would be considered pretty left-wing not so long ago. But the hard left there opposed it because they thought the money, they didn't want revenue neutral, they want revenue raising carbon tax to funnel into green jobs and anti-poverty mechanisms. And so they undercut it. It lost. They then 2 years later had their own ballot initiative, which was a revenue raising carbon tax. That lost. Now we keep doubling and tripling down on the left on what to do about climate. Oh, well, that didn't work in Washington State. Let's now do mega Green New Deal. We won't even bother about having the carbon tax element of it. We're just going to say deficit spend to your heart's content and tack on all these other populist socialist wish list items and make this a wholly radical transformation of the American economy. If they wanted Overton window, they would be saying some nice things about the other ideas out there and trying to elevate them as well, so you're having a broad discussion about different choices. There's a bipartisan carbon tax bill that is introduced right now. They don't mention it at all. In fact, the draft FAQ that Ocasio-Cortez had to disavow, but came out of work from her team, just they knew it wasn't ready for prime time, was
after they put it on her website and sent it to NPR.
Right. Was very hesitant about carbon tax. I forget what the exact wording was. I don't think they completely discounted it as a possibility, but they certainly didn't want to hold it up as the ideal goal here. So I think the primary point of this is not Overton window. It is to have a litmus test, to smoke out who's a true progressive and who isn't. And abolish ICE was exactly the same way. They wrote about at the time. Yeah. Immigration was an issue that united Democrats until Abolish ICE came along, and then it was a divisive point amongst Democrats. And so now, with Green New Deal, while the sponsors are trying to claim this now has huge momentum, that this is now the gold standard. Ocasio-Cortez even had a tweet saying, this is so strong that the Republicans have to attack fake FAQs, when in fact it has 70 co-sponsors and is backed by all the presidential candidates. Now that's an embellishment, and when she said it, it was actually 65 Congress people, 67 if you count the couple non-voting members, a quibble. And it's not all the presidential candidates, it's a good number of them, but it's not Sherrod Brown who's talking about it. It's not John Delaney. It's not Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard is someone saying, I got to look at the details here. I'm not going to go rushing into this. The voice of reason, Tulsi Gabbard. So those numbers don't reflect a united Democratic Party around this. They reflect a divided Democratic Party around this. Most Congress people are not sponsors. You have 3/4 of the Democratic caucus not on board. You have almost every senator. The only senators who are on this are primarily the candidates. So you'll be able to say, well, all the candidates are on board. Yeah, because they're trying to appeal to the left wing of the party right now. They're not thinking general election. Almost everybody else who has to run for re-election in their states is not on board.
Well, I think we agree on the facts, but not the interpretation. The candidates, the senators who are running for president currently are by and large supporting this. And that's because the energy and future of the party is AOC. And I'm going to read, this is from a Twitter follower of mine, USMC Do or Die. Dems in the last month, this is like a checklist. Third trimester abortion, no cows, no meat, no cars or airplanes, no business. He's talking about Amazon. Free health care, free college, pay people unwilling to work, tear down every building in America. Now, we'll allow for some embellishment, but essentially
if you're not Ocasio-Cortez on not getting your facts straight, there's a lot there. That is heavy spin.
This is a tweet by a guy named USMC Do or Die. But there are elements of truth to every single thing cited there.
Andrew Cuomo and Bill de Blasio were for Amazon being in New York City.
And yet they're not going to be. So why? Why are they not going to be? Because of AOC.
Well, in part. I mean, I'll agree with you this much. The activist left, if I could use that term a little. I mean, I don't think every activist is in this camp, but I'm just going to use that phrase for the moment. They have been very good at making noise and drawing attention to their positions and giving the impression that they have the whip hand. And that is why Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Kirsten Gillibrand, even Amy Klobuchar, who's generally trying to run more to the middle, felt, I better say I'm a sponsor of Green New Deal. I don't want someone to hit me and claim that I'm being squeamish about this. So that Klobuchar quickly said, well, I endorse it because it's aspirational. I'm not endorsing every particular here. So as the backlash has come to Green New Deal, you're starting to see Democrats saying, well, yeah, I'm sort of for it, but maybe not exactly the way it's written right here. So I think there is a misinterpretation of how broad the AOC support is. Look, I know a lot of people. I never get out of the house. I shouldn't say a lot. I know some people who I know have pragmatic sensibilities in the Democratic diaspora, but will say to me, "I love AOC's energy." I think there's widespread excitement for her energy level. The fact that she is confident, the fact that she pushes issues, the fact that she stirs up debate, I think a lot of Democrats like that more than the number of Democrats that like the particulars.
Right.
So,
you know what the problem with this is? The Democratic Party is the Republican Party in 2009, 2010. You are Matt Lewis of 2009, 2010.
Well,
and you're Matt Lewis saying, well, yeah, Sarah Palin's got some, nobody, the people I know are more mainstream, but she brings excitement and people, I feel like, and I'm going to say this is a fair appraisal, but I feel like I'm the grizzled old veteran who's like been through this and seen what this movement in reverse did to my party and my movement, the conservative movement. And I'm watching it play out right now. And you're thinking, well, AOC's just one person. Most liberals I know are more sane, more pragmatic. We can control her. We've got Nancy Pelosi. And I'm like, I've seen this show before.
Well, here's my counter data point. We've had a couple polls. We had a Monmouth poll and a CNN poll in the past month, probing the question: is it most important to have a nominee that shares all of your policy views, or is it most important to have a nominee that can beat Trump even if that person doesn't share all your policy views? And the wording of the two questions is different. I think the Monmouth poll is more loaded than the CNN poll, but both came out essentially the same way, beating Trump first and foremost, purist on policy positions way down the list. So I don't think it's the case. I mean, look, is there a emboldened movement on the left? Absolutely. It's not just AOC. I don't think she is a one-woman band. I think she is doing as well as she is because she is riding what has been a growing wave of populism, socialism in the young left, and that's why she's not critically fact-checked by a lot of those folks, because she is echoing various themes that have been percolating for some time. I mean, the whole notion that you shouldn't care about where the money comes from because the Republicans don't. She didn't invent that. That's been swirling out there. She's writing that. So that's a real. I mean, that's a real faction. But
aside from Winston Churchill, who essentially stood alone, that's what you're describing is true of every leader. I mean, Donald Trump didn't invent his Trumpism either.
But there's long been on the Democratic Party, I think, a more consistent desire to communicate. We are the fiscally responsible ones. We're the ones that don't spend us into oblivion. We clean up the messes of the Republicans. Bill Clinton had the Deficit Reduction Act, where he raised taxes and actually brought the deficit down. Barack Obama didn't do that at the start because of the crash, but within a couple of years did want to be seen as the person taming the deficit. And in fact, the deficit as ratio of GDP did come down to the level that the Simpson-Bowles commissions wanted to come down to, because he agreed with the Republicans on deficit reduction measures as part of the debt ceiling compromises post Tea Party, and he bragged about that as president. So there's always been a strain of Democrats, I would say a dominant strain, that has wanted to be seen as someone as a party that contains the deficit, and the hard left has hated that and wants to confront it and say, don't even give it any lip service whatsoever. Don't even pretend you have to care about that stuff. And AOC is riding that sentiment. That's a real faction, but it's not necessarily the dominant faction. I'm not going to go out and say today an AOC type candidate is going to lose the primary. I'm not going to predict that. Maybe the sentiment keeps rising over time, but the data that we have seen does not suggest that is where the majority of the party is. And there's certainly room for a Democrat to run against that sentiment in the primary. Okay. That's why Howard Schultz type saying, I can't run as a Democrat. They've gone too far left. You don't know that yet. You are saying the game is over way before it is finished.
Well, I would say two things. One, Republicans nominated Mitt Romney in 2012. Had Mitt Romney won in 2012, things might have turned out differently, but he did not win. And that further radicalized, rather than being having a chastening effect on Republicans and conservatives, that further radicalized them. And so it may, I think it may well be that Democrats, that the empire strikes back. Democrats try to come to their senses, nominate a centrist. If they win, that would be good for America in this regard. But if they lose, then then you go full Monty.
If a Biden or a Klobuchar or a McAuliffe or a Bloomberg, if they got the nomination and the left didn't peel off and picked a Jill Stein, well, maybe if they did.
It probably doesn't matter.
Probably doesn't matter.
If a
moderate's picked and loses to Trump, yeah, the AOC faction gets supercharged and probably can rule the roost in 2024. I would think that's a plausible scenario, but we don't know that's what's going to happen in 2020.
We don't know. I agree, and it's possible that just as Republicans in the midst of the Tea Party uprising nominated Mitt Romney of all people, it is possible that the Democrats in the midst of this socialist uprising will nominate Amy Klobuchar or Joe Biden. But I also think that there are trends that have been unloosed on us that include Twitter as an example, of reality TV as an example. All of these trends, I think, are conspiring against pragmatism and centrism, and they are all pushing greater polarization. And we're fighting an uphill battle against that right now.
Now, I have a piece in Politico that came out on Monday. I should also add, I had a Real Clear Politics piece. Actually, the Real Clear Politics piece on Green New Deal came out on Monday. I think the electability piece came out on Tuesday. So I had a piece in Politico on Tuesday, which was how to identify which Democrat candidate is the most electable. And now there is a debate whether electability is even a thing. In fact, you've had several pieces, largely coming from the left,
right,
saying electability is bunk.
Well, in fairness, if you were going to say which Republican was the most electable, you wouldn't have thought Donald Trump.
Well, that's part of the argument. That
you would have said maybe I don't know. I would have said Marco Rubio.
Right.
But
Rubio was most electable on paper. Trump, fails every conceivable electability metric you could have come up with, and yet the guy won.
And by the way, I'm not convinced Rubio wouldn't have won. We actually don't. There's no way of knowing, but I can guarantee the Electoral College would have looked vastly different. It would have been a different map.
Sure. People on the left say, you said Hillary was more electable and she lost. You said John Kerry is more electable than Howard Dean. He lost. This is just, pundit nonsense that is used, arguably as a ruse to box out true blue progressives in favor of milquetoast moderates, and it doesn't work. So therefore, Democratic primary voter, you should just vote your hopes and dreams. Vote for the person you like. You can't know what's most electable, so just put it out of your mind. And I think half that argument is correct. To say if you're the more moderate candidate, therefore you're the most electable, well, that's way too simplistic. There is a way to win an election that is at least partially, if not primarily, based on energizing your own base.
And this philosophy, I think, comes out of the experience of Republicans nominating Goldwater and Democrats nominating
McGovern.
Right. And so this conventional wisdom didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, there was an experience that led people to say there are people who are just not electable.
Well, and that is why and I said this explicitly in the article, I mentioned Goldwater and McGovern specifically. You're right that dividing electability is not so simple, and it cannot be simply boiled down to where you land on the ideological spectrum. But there's also plenty of examples of just people in the primary vote saying, I like this person, and therefore I know it's going to be okay. Not just old examples like Goldwater and McGovern, Randy Bryce, Christine O'Donnell, Todd Aiken. just because you like them doesn't mean a swing voter is going to like them, and swing voters do exist even if they're in smaller numbers. So it may not be so easy to put yourself in a swing voter's shoes, but it doesn't mean that you should stop trying altogether and figure what could maximize the chances of winning. And having said that, I would not call Donald Trump a quintessential electable candidate, but you can be the least unelectable. You could be the right person at the right time, considering what the political circumstances are. I don't think it behooves you as a primary voter to say, I'm not going to try to pick somebody who's got the best chance of winning. And so I tried to come up with different criteria that primary voters should look to. So to come back to this earlier point, there's a debate whether a presidential candidate should have a strategy based on winning swing voters, or should be primarily based on juicing base voters and pulling out unlikely voters who would be more excited by an ideological candidate. I'm not going to adjudicate who's the winner of that argument. I mean, Donald Trump did win. Barack Obama won with a lot of base motivation. I don't think he completely discounted the swing, but he's pretty heavy on base motivation there. So there's examples. Tell me what you think the right strategy is.
Okay.
And show me you know how to pull it off.
I can't do that, but I'll tell you what I think the right strategy is, okay? Number one, what is the obstacle preventing Democrats from winning the presidency? It's the electoral college, right? I mean, Hillary won the popular vote.
Okay, sure.
So it's the electoral college.
Right.
So I think number one, anybody who is arguing electability needs to be looking at it specifically through a frame of the electoral college, and just go to 270towin.com and start playing around with the map. I think the easiest way. So first of all, Democrats, Florida would be a big state to flip, and I think Democrats could flip Florida, but I don't think there's anyone running. Is there anyone running with a specific play to flip Florida? I don't think so, right?
Not Florida, but you have, Klobuchar saying I can win in the Midwest. If Scher runs, he's going to say he can win in the Midwest.
That's my next point. I think it's Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania.
So my point in the article is, so some people have that argument that this is primarily about the Midwest, and therefore, if I say I have the strategy to win the Midwest, you should vote for me. So Klobuchar is saying, I'm from the Midwest, vote for me. Sherrod Brown's going to say, I won in Ohio, vote for me. I would say that is not nearly enough evidence to prove to me you know how to win in the Midwest today as a presidential candidate. Yeah. You've won in the Midwest before. Well, how did you do that exactly? Are you going to do the same thing as a presidential candidate as you did as a senatorial candidate? Al Gore won in Tennessee as a senator, but he was a different politician as a presidential candidate. Mitt Romney won in Massachusetts as governor. He was a different politician as a national candidate. Explain to me what you did that allowed you to win on difficult terrain, and how, and are you going to apply that, even if it offends progressive sensibilities, as a presidential candidate? Show me the swing voter in Ohio that is going to come up on stage with you and say, I voted for Trump in Ohio in 2016. I will vote for Sherrod Brown in 2020. And hopefully that's not just anecdotal. You're organizing those people. You're proving to me those people are with you and will be with you in the general election.
Well, I think the Al Gore one isn't really fair, because not only did he change dramatically, but Tennessee changed in those 8 years dramatically.
Well, you could say about Ohio, though. Ohio is not the same state that it was when it elected Obama in 2008, 2012. There's some significant demographic changes and sensibility changes that have gone on there. So is Sherrod Brown really, does he have the secret to Ohio, or is he just the last Democrat standing and the state's moving away from him? So he needs to prove it.
I will say this. I think that there is a temperament and a personality type. And so Joe Manchin feels like West Virginia. Sherrod Brown feels like Ohio. Who's the guy out in Montana who feels like Montana?
Steve Bullock.
Right. So there is I think that goes a long way. And I'm not saying that delivers Ohio or West Virginia alone, but you could be a Democrat who looks like a city slicker, managed to win a Midwestern working class, Rust Belt state. I think that one of the things that helps translate it is that personality, the persona. And in this case, I feel like Klobuchar and Biden and Brown, that they do have that. I think Biden is by far the best pick because I think that if there's tomorrow a revelation about Amy Klobuchar or Sherrod Brown, that will hurt them. I think with Biden, it's baked in the cake. You know who Biden is, warts and all. If something comes out, well, that's just Joe being Joe. And so I think that just like Trump is basically, you're with him, he's not going to have any, he's not going to lose any voters. I think Biden is so well known that he doesn't have to worry about erosion. And I do think he would play very well in Pennsylvania and Michigan and those states. Now and that's the election, right?
Now, there's a flip side to that electability question, which is show me that not only can you win the swing voters that you say you can, or the case of the left, that you can pull out the unlikely left-leaning independents that you say you can, but also show me you can keep the party together come election day. So it's one thing for Joe Biden to say, I can win Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan. I know how to win white working class voters. But if he is sticking his foot in his mouth over Anita Hill, and you're starting to see more and more women turn against him, and more young people turn against him, it raises the specter that there's going to be a robust Green Party candidacy that's going to split the vote, and he wouldn't be in a good place come election day. And this is also true for Bernie or Warren. I mean, you see with Howard Schultz, if they may be able to say, look, I can get the youth to really come out in big numbers, but if it means that Howard Schultz says, okay, you nominate Bernie or Warren, I'm definitely going in there, and I'm definitely splitting the vote, well, that's going to undercut that argument too. So totally. It's really complicated.
And I think one unspoken thing that's coming from our conversation right now, but unspoken, is that Donald Trump actually could win.
Well,
Donald Trump actually could be reelected.
I think the biggest threat to Democrats winning is if the anti-Trump vote divides, and it can divide either if the candidate is a moderate or a populist, depending on how well they can mitigate the internal divisions in the party and the country.
Yeah. Now let me throw in an extra wrinkle of how I would, if I were a Democrat, what I would do. I nominate Biden, and basically, in terms of where he spends his time, I mean, it's Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. It's basically like he's running for governor of the Midwest, of the industrial Midwest, Iowa, that kind of thing. Then I pick either Castro or Beto, probably Castro, but we have to vet everyone. And we make a big play for Texas and the South. That person would never go outside the Southwest, essentially. I don't know how you could strategize it any better, unless Oprah Winfrey decides to run for president, which I guess could happen.
Well, you could go with Stacey Abrams.
No, I don't think so.
Because if you could tip Georgia,
I should do the map with that.
That arguably could be a big help.
Actually, that's interesting. Yeah, Georgia is probably winnable, but again, it's like Beto O'Rourke lost Texas. Is Georgia? I mean, Georgia's trending more Democrat, I assume, too. Just like
Abrams was closer to winning than O'Rourke was in Texas by a little bit. Now, you might argue that that's high watermark for both of them, and that they can't. Neither one actually won. But I do think for any white male, Usually, very hard to have two white males, so very hard to have Biden and Beto work in this context. I mean, a white male winning is going to lead to grumbling in some quarters of the party, and though you have to mitigate that at least with it's either a woman or a person of color, and arguably ideally both. And so,
she could solve some problems for Joe. Maybe she could create problems too. I don't know.
Well, everyone's got to be vetted. But there'd be a strong case for Kamala Harris, but she's coming from a coastal region and an urban region, so arguably doesn't give you a lot of electoral vote help the way Stacey Abrams might be able to. And maybe there's a congresswoman out there. I think Lauren Underwood might be too young.
What about now? I will say this. I think that what about the Palin danger here with the running mates? I mean, we're getting way ahead of ourselves in terms of electability, but Biden is in a similar situation. Biden would presumably be in a similar situation as John McCain. He needs to pick someone who's more, in this case, more liberal, closer to the base than he is, and he needs to pick someone younger, and he needs to pick someone who contrasts his old white male boringness. And McCain did all those things. And he actually picked someone who was actually governor of a state, unlike Stacey Abrams or Beto O'Rourke for that matter.
But not well vetted.
Not ready for prime time, certainly. Anyway, is that doesn't that pose that's going to be an issue potentially for him to worry about?
Well, Mondale got into a problem because it seemed like he was just doing identity politics for his VP and not putting forth who's ready to lead the country. And so there's going to be a challenge there, because once you get into, if you're going to say it's got to be a woman of color, well, you don't have a lot of governors to choose from. You don't have a lot of senators to choose from. But you got Tammy Duckworth. You got Tammy Baldwin, Wisconsin. Not person of color, but LGBT. So I think there are some choices there that are a little more out of the box, who are not necessarily going to be candidates that you could consider. But again, everyone's got to vet.
2 words for you, Bill: Tulsi Gabbard.
Now I have a piece that's coming out. It's not out yet. Talking about the trials and tribulations of the poor old straight white men considering to run for presidency. Because the vast majority of people who've announced, I mean, literally every candidate who's announced that they're running or exploratory committee is not a straight white male, except for John Delaney. And that's 9 candidates. I'm not going to count Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang, because that's ridiculous. But as far as the people who are current or former office holders.
And you're even counting the guy from Indiana in this, right?
I mean, at least he's elected to something.
Yeah.
Mayor of South Bend. Pete,
I hear good things.
What's that?
I heard he was on. I didn't see this, but I've heard from a couple people that he was on Morning Joe or something, and he's pretty charismatic and likable.
I mean, he's got a lot of promise. I think he bought into the notion that I'm stuck in Indiana and I can't run statewide here. I can't run for governor or senator, so this is my only way up and out. And I think that is not right. I mean, you have examples of people that won in red areas this past election: governor of Kansas, congresswoman in Oklahoma, congressman in South Carolina. I would have stayed in Indiana if I was him, but he didn't buy that logic, and so he is where he is. But he is a compelling figure. I don't think he's got a great shot at actually winning, but he's good on TV. Anyway, if the people who are considered on the sidelines, you have about 17 people who are thinking about running. 16 of them are straight white males. So it's very weird dichotomy where the people who are raring to go, who sensed the water's warm for me, were not straight white males, and those thinking, I'm not so sure this is the year for me, are all straight white males. But as I was saying before, I don't think this means what you think it means. Yes, Ron Brownski had a great piece in CNN. He really crunched the numbers. I mean, the party is heavily female, heavily non-white. It's almost 60% female, the primary electorate. It's about a third non-white. It's a little more than a third college-educated white, which is the most liberal contingent of the party. So all that does seem to add up for someone who is a person of color or a woman. But you also have this electability factor. I'm not arguing at all that if you're a non-white male, you're not electable. I don't make that argument. But
I think if you buy into the electoral college argument that is the problem Democrats face, and you buy into the argument that the best way to win the electoral college is to flip the industrial Midwest, then I think one could make an argument that if you look at the candidates, I mean, Amy Klobuchar is a white woman. She's in the category of people we think could win there. But Biden, the other two are Biden and Brown, right?
From Midwest?
Yeah.
Tim Ryan, Congressman from Ohio. Congressman from Ohio is considering it.
My point is, as of now, and this could change in the future, but as of now, if your definition of electability means winning the electoral college by virtue of flipping Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, then most of the candidates are white men who would be the most electable.
And they're by and large moderate pragmatists. Only Bernie really is hardcore left, and people thought that Scher was hardcore left, or learning, wait a second, maybe that guy's more moderate than I thought.
But Bernie's also got Bernie has the populist appeal. He is against identity politics. It's about class consciousness. And so it doesn't matter that Bernie is a leftist. He probably could play better in that area.
Now, having said all this, it is not in the white male candidate's interests to make the argument you are making.
Well, why. Let me just say, that is why you should not listen to politicians. They're boring. Listen to commentators, for now at least. I mean, at some point, maybe it'll be too. You can't say anything controversial at all. But for now, I think people like us, we're the ones who say the interesting stuff.
Well, John Edwards in 2008, and this is before we knew what he was doing on the side, he argued, I mean, he was Southern white male.
Yeah.
He got on the ticket with Kerry on the notion he could flip Southern red states. He said, he was running up against Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. He said, I'm the most electable because I can go to every corner of America. Wink, wink.
Right.
And there are other people who are less circumspect about that, who said it much more bluntly.
Obama only went on to become a two-term president.
Right. Well, exactly. So not only did that argument not convince Democratic primary voters, it was proven wrong in the general election.
Right.
So if any of these white male can't
say, no, the problem with John Edwards saying that is he has a hidden agenda. Like, I don't have an agenda. Like, I really couldn't care less where which way Ohio goes. But Edwards had a hidden agenda for saying that. But I would say, saying that these other people are racist does not make you a racist. It may make you a bad prognosticator, or in the case of saying that Obama couldn't win, it made him certainly incorrect.
Well, there's definitely a strain of Democrats who are deeply skittish, pessimistic, cynical, who believe the country is not ready for A, B, or C, but that sentiment did not prevail in 2008. And I think even if the candidate's not saying it, if the candidate's supporters are saying it, it still gets attributed to the candidate. And I don't think it's going to help that candidate. If you're a white male candidate, straight white male candidate, and you're thinking, how do I get through this? Yeah. I would clamp down all my team and say, you do not traffic in that argument.
Right. You need other people to say it or think it, but you don't say it. But let me just add this part to it. My argument is not that the people of Ohio and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are racist. It's that the candidates who happen to be from there at the top tier, who happen to have residents there, happen to be by and large white men. I mean, Ken Blackwell was the Attorney General, Secretary of State of Ohio.
African-American Republican.
African-American. If he were still in the conversation at the presidential level, if he were running, well, then I might be mentioning him. right? You know what I'm saying? In a Republican primary, but they're not there. I mean, Kamala Harris is from California. If she were from Ohio, that might be a different conversation.
So let me give you an example here of how tricky this is for the male candidates, even take the straight white out of it. Cory Booker is on Rachel Maddow this week, and he gets asked the question from Rachel Maddow: if you're the nominee, will you commit to having a woman as your VP? Now, Rachel did not ask the even harsher question: why don't you just get out of the way, buddy? You got 5 women already running. They run the gamut in terms of experience, geography, demography, ideology. Are you saying that they're not good enough? You're saying they're not qualified? Well, why, isn't it time? Shouldn't you be a big boy and get out of the way? So Rachel didn't ask that question, but it's kind of
that would be. Are you saying that would be a fair or legitimate question to ask?
That question will get asked, and any white male candidate's going to have to answer it.
But Cory Booker is not a white male candidate.
But he's a male candidate, so we got asked. You got asked the question in a slightly different way, and clearly Booker understood what underlies that question, and so he gave a somewhat circuitous answer where he says, certainly I'd be looking at women first and foremost. I don't want to box myself in and promise that. Box myself in is a quote from him. But he then volunteers. I thought there should be a woman president right now, and I worked for that, which obviously is a reference to Hillary Clinton. But it does leave hanging out there, why aren't you doing it right now? If you think it's so important, why are you getting in the way of that? And it's not an easy question. You might think it's an unfair question. It's a loaded question. But when it gets asked, if you don't have a good answer, or at least a good dodge of an answer, it can get very messy for you.
Well, I think it's an unfair question. It's not a question that's likely ever going to be ever. It's not going to come up in a Republican primary anytime soon. You're right, though. I think it is going to basically come up, whether or not it's specifically asked in a debate or not. It's going to be a question, and I think this is the weird irony of the left destroying itself. I mean, this could be a diatribe, and it's not well thought through, but I really feel like the left right now, holding itself. I mean, look what happened in Virginia is a classic example. We've really moved past that so much. It's amazing. But you got the 2 candidates with the black face, and then in the middle you have the Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax, accused by 2 women of sexual assault. And there was this notion on the left that you should always believe the women. And now this raises questions like, well, what about due process? What about the presumption of innocence? This is a Democratic African-American elected official who is now saying, give me due process, give me the presumption of innocence. I'm not going to resign. Don't impeach me. It strikes me that, one of the things that Andrew Breitbart was a big proponent of was making the left abide by their own standards. And this is not conservatives making the left abide by their own standards, but it does strike me like when you've got a guy like Cory Booker, I'm not a big fan of his, but there's a chance to elect, an African-American liberal Democrat politician, and you're going to put him through the ringer about why he doesn't just get out of the way and let somebody else get elected president who somehow checks more boxes than him.
Well, that's why I think the white men are going to get that question faster than Cory Booker.
Is more intersectional than him.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's invent white male liberal politician who is, down with all the right causes. You have a chance, and that guy's going to get put through the ringer. I guess I should sit back and and open the popcorn.
Well, let me add one more element to this though, because you mentioned Virginia. Take Justin Fairfax out because that's more about an alleged crime, and get back to the blackface question, which speaks to identity politics and where Democrats need to shed their past and make a clean break from the past and not have people who have that kind of baggage still around. As I think you know, the Washington Post poll that came out the other day showed that 58% of African Americans did not want Ralph Northam to resign. There was a great capacity for forgiveness. Maybe it's because he's a Democrat, but whatever the reason is there was not the same rush to force him out that you had from Republicans and white liberals. So you look at the presidential primary polling right now. You add up all of the white men, straight white men that are in the field and what they're getting in the vote, it's 64%. Mostly Bernie and Biden, but also Beto and Scher and the others. So it's not the case that the party writ large is demanding that it's a non-white male. Now, there's clearly a great appetite for that, and that's why you're going to get the question. You're going to have to answer the question, and if you botch the question, that's going to raise the question: can you unify this party in this country? Even if it's presidents get asked unfair loaded questions all the time on all sorts of issues. That's the deal. You have to know how to answer those questions in a way that preserve your viability, go down well with the public, maintain your ability to build a coalition. So I think there is an opening for these candidates to do that, but they have to be aware of what the pitfalls are, which might speak to why they have not rushed into the race, because they need to think real carefully. What are all the ways I am going to be put through the ringer, and how am I going to deal with it?
Well, and I would say a couple things. One, Biden and Bernie are, you're talking about a guy who was vice president for 8 years to Barack Obama, and another guy who just ran against Hillary Clinton. And so, they have by far the most name ID and whatever credentials, I think, to run this time around. So it doesn't surprise me that if you add up their votes, but I'm not convinced. I don't know if either of them are going to run, really. I think for the good of the Democratic Party, Joe Biden should be the nominee. But who knows if he's even going to run. I don't know if he's got the fire in the belly at this point in his career to do it. So we'll just wait and see. And the other thing I would say is, to me, there may be this silent majority out there, but to me, at the end of the day, the media and the energy is all in the sort of AOC base. And I don't care if that's 30% or 40% of the Democratic Party. One has the sense that that is where things are headed, certainly in the Democratic Party. So you can tell me all day long that they're not the majority. It just seems to me, and maybe it's because I spend too much time on Twitter and not enough time, out in the heartland.
I want to say one last thing at this point that I think we should wrap up.
Okay.
McConnell's going to bring Green New Deal to the floor of the Senate.
Yes, brilliant move. Cocaine Mitch.
Now, this happened with Abolish ICE, and Democrats joined Republicans in saying we don't agree with Abolish ICE. And that pretty much ended the debate around Abolish ICE. This is even more high profile than that was. So I watch that vote. CMA Democrats stick with the resolution or scurry away from it, and see what that does to AOC's standing afterwards. Now, I agree that things that I might have thought would have slowed their roll, like not winning almost any congressional races in the midterms and having the moderates win all the races that flip seats. I thought that might have, made them pause. They managed to blow through that and maintain and increase the amount of power and attention that they get. But that would be their first significant legislative defeat. And let's see how that movement looks once that happens.
All right. All I say is props to Cocaine Mitch for a fun maneuver. I enjoy this.
What do you got to plug, sir?
So I saw every movie nominated for Best Picture for the Oscars, which are next week. So my newsletter, Matt Lewis and the Newsletter, I will be basically giving you my take on all those movies and more. So sign up for that, so Matt K. Lewis.
I've seen none of those movies.
Yeah.
I'm having post-Valentine's Day date night tonight.
Yeah.
Going out for a 72-ounce steak downtown Northampton, and coming back and to watch a movie at home. I would like to watch an Oscar movie. Should I watch Black Klansman or The Favorite?
Okay. I would say both good movies. The Black Klansman, believe it or not, is actually very funny and fun. It's also obviously about a serious topic, but it's a true story of an African-American detective in the early 1970s who infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan. And like Topher Grace plays David Duke, for example. So believe it or not, even though it's about a serious topic, that's a very fun movie. The Favorite is a different sort of movie. There is some humor. It's about these two women who are vying for the attention of the Queen of England in the early 1700s, and it's more there's some erotic, sexual vibe stuff going on there. There is some humor. It's a little more. I would say that The Favorite is more avant-garde. So I can't say that one movie is better than the other, but they're both good at just which vibe you want to go into. But I would say you can't go wrong with either movie.
All right.
You heard it here first.
Okay, I'll check out the rest of Matt's Oscar analysis on his podcast.
Yeah. And I also, for Patreon supporters, I did a 20-minute talk where I went through all the movies and talked about what I liked about them, the pros and cons, and what I think was overrated. Also on my podcast, Matt Lewis in the News, I interviewed Michael Tomasky, my editor at the Daily Beast, about his great new book, If We Can Keep It. Check that out.
All right. Check out my Politico pieces and my Real Clear Politics piece that I mentioned earlier. My podcast with John Ward, author of Camelot's End, is up in new books in politics. And I know you're off next week, so we got to figure out what we're going to do for next week. But I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Maybe people should vote on. We haven't had a substitute for years, probably. But maybe people could chime in. Our good friend Bill Butler could perhaps be available. Alexis Levinson, I know, has done it in the past. Chime in. Who do you want to see?
All right, I will. I'll listen to your feedback and I'll make my executive decision.
This is totally up to Bill. Once I say I can't make it, then I'm out of it. So enjoy, and I'll be back in 2 weeks. You'll be back next week in the DMZ.
All right, take care.
Yeah.